The flight was destined for Paris and had two purposes. Steffi was scheduled to attend a vital meeting with European distributors, which would determine the success of Forrester Creations' growth into new markets. But she had also promised Aspen and Hayes a weekend in Disneyland Paris, a rare treat given her hectic work. Clara, the children's nanny, a sweet-looking woman in her 40s, sat nearby, ready to take over when Steffi's duties required her attention. The crew, Captain Daniel Pierce, a seasoned pilot with over 20 years of experience, and First Officer Emily Chun, had completed their pre-flight inspections meticulously. Everything was in order. The jet took off easily at 11:47 a.m., soaring into the cloudless sky. Steffi was analyzing sales predictions 40 minutes into the journey, while the jet cruised at 41,000 feet, when she felt a tiny shake in the cabin. She looked up, her brow furrowed. The sensation was faint at first, like a blip in the jet's beat, but it became steadier and more forceful. Aspen looked up from her game, her hazel eyes widening. "Mommy, what is that?" she inquired, her tone tinged with concern. "It's just turbulence, sweetheart," Steffi explained, attempting a grin. She'd flown numerous times. Bumps were typical. But Clara's normally calm face revealed a flash of alarm. Steffi clicked the call button, and the flight attendant arrived from the galley wearing a trained smile. "Is everything okay, Miss Forrester?" The attendant, a young woman named Lila, inquired. "Is the shaking normal?" Steffi inquired, maintaining a polite tone for the sake of the youngsters. Lila nodded. "I'll check with the cockpit, but it's most likely just a rough patch of air." She vanished toward the plane's front. Steffi cast a peek at Clara, who was grasping the armrests. Moments later, the cabin shook violently. Hayes dropped the iPad to the floor. Aspen gasped, and Steffi unbuckled her seatbelt and knelt alongside her children. "It's okay, babies," she whispered calmly, despite the discomfort in her chest. "Just hold on to me." The intercom crackled and Captain Pierce's voice came through, calm yet abrupt. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're having some mechanical troubles. Please remain seated and secure your seatbelt. We're working to have this resolved." Steffi's heart thudded. Mechanical difficulties. She looked out the window expecting to see the infinite blue of moments ago, but instead saw something that made her blood run cold. A trail of dark smoke streaming from the left engine. Her thoughts raced. She was hardly an aviation specialist, but smoke was never a good indication. She drew Aspen and Hayes close, their little bodies shivering against her. Clara's voice was scarcely audible. "Steffi, what is happening?" "I'm not sure," Steffi acknowledged, her CEO veneer slipping. She punched the contact button again. But before Lila could react, a thunderous bang rang out from the left side of the plane. The cabin shook violently, and a chorus of gasps filled the air. Warning alarms sounded from the cockpit, their piercing tones cutting through the commotion. Steffi's eyes returned to the window. Flames were now evident, licking the wing where the engine had once been. Her breath caught in her throat. "Mommy!" Aspen yelled, her voice cutting through the din. Hayes started crying, his small hands gripping Steffi's blouse. She clutched them hard, her mind a swirl of fear and determination. She had to defend them. She had to. The intercom crackled again, this time with First Officer Chen's strained and frantic voice. "Prepare for an emergency landing. Assume brace positions quickly." Steffi's years of corporate trip experience kicked in. She guided Aspen and Hayes into the brace position, heads down and hands over their necks. Clara followed suit, mouth moving in quiet prayer. The jet began to fall quickly, with the cabin tilting at an unusual angle. Oxygen masks fell from the ceiling, swinging madly. Steffi grabbed one for each youngster and secured it over their faces before putting on her own. The bitter scent of smoke permeated the air, despite the sealed cabin. The descent was chaotic. Magazines, a water bottle, and Hayes' plush bear tumbled through the cabin. Steffi's thoughts raced through the worst-case possibilities, but she pushed herself to concentrate on her children. "Look at me," she asked, her voice muffled by the mask. "We're going to be fine. I adore you both so much." Aspen's eyes were wide with horror, but she nodded. Hayes, who was too little to really understand the danger, clutched to her hand. The jet shook severely, and Steffi's stomach fell as it plummeted deeper. She looked at Clara, whose face was pale but determined. Lila, the flight attendant, was strapped into her jump seat, her gaze locked on the passengers and her lips pulled together in a narrow line. The flames outside grew more intense, visible through the windows as they destroyed the left wing. The jet systems were failing, with one engine gone and the other struggling to compensate. Captain Pierce and First Officer Chun struggled for control in the cockpit, exchanging technical jargon on the radio. They were heading for an emergency landing at San Francisco International, the nearest airport, but the fire was spreading too fast. Hydraulic systems were failing, and the jet's reactivity was waning. Steffi was unaware of the specifics of the cockpit struggle, but she could feel the plane's unusual motions. Every shock, every dip made her heart race faster. She remembered her family, her parents, Ridge and Taylor, who were anticipating a video visit from Paris tomorrow, and her brother Thomas, who had teased her about sneaking in a croissant run before her meetings. She reflected on the empire she had built, the design she had poured her heart and her into, and the legacy she wished to leave for her children. Would it all end in a smoking jet 30,000 feet above the ocean? When the plane hit a pocket of turbulence, a new wave of cries erupted. Steffi tightened her grip on Aspen and Hayes, uttering reassurances she wasn't sure she trusted. The cabin was becoming hotter and the smoke thicker. She could hear Clara coughing next to her. The jet's descent was now a controlled crash, with the pilots doing everything possible to keep it from spiraling into the sea. Minutes seemed like hours. The ground was approaching too quickly. Steffi got glimpses of land through the glass, Northern California's rugged shoreline. The jet was low enough now that she could see freeways, bits of green, and the glitter of water. San Francisco was nearby, but the fire was closer. A second explosion rocked the jet, this time from the rear. The tail section, which housed the auxiliary power unit, had ignited. The airplane lurched forwards, its nose lowering dangerously. "Brace! Brace!" Chen's voice boomed across the speaker, his urgency palpable. Steffi put her forehead against her knees and wrapped her arms around her children. She could feel their small bodies trembling, their breath ragged through the oxygen masks. The plane landed with a bone-rattling thump and skidded over the runway at San Francisco International. Metal screamed on asphalt, and the cabin erupted in a deafening noise as the jet slipped out of control toward the edge of the runway. The consequences were disastrous. The weakening left wing split off, sending metal pieces flying. The fuselage separated toward the back, and flames erupted within the cabin. Steffi's world was a whirl of heat, noise, and misery. She clutched to Aspen and Hayes, protecting them with her body as debris showered down. The jet eventually came to a halt, its front end smashed against a concrete barrier. Silence ensued, interrupted only by the crackle of flames and the distant wail of emergency sirens. Steffi's head throbbed and her vision blurred. She felt blood pouring down her temple, but she was still alive. She undid her seatbelt and checked her children. Aspen remained aware, her face drenched with tears but unhurt. Hayes was limp, his little chest rising and falling slightly. Steffi felt a wave of panic as she checked his pulse, weak but there. "Clara!" Steffi called, her voice husky. She turned to face the nanny, but Clara was slumped in her seat, her head at an unusual angle. Steffi reached for her, gently shaking her, but she did not respond. Her heart fell when she noticed Clara's chest was quiet and her eyes were unseeing. Grief hit her like a tidal wave, with little time to process it. The fire was growing, and the heat was intolerable. "Lila!" Steffi exclaimed, searching for the flight attendant. Lila struggled to her feet, blood streaming from a gash in her forehead. "We need to get out," Steffi cried, unbuckling Aspen and taking Hayes into her arms. Lila nodded and staggered toward the emergency exit. Lila flung her weight against the stuck door, and it gave way with a groan. Fresh air surged in and mixed with the stifling smoke. Steffi carried Hayes and guided Aspen with her free hand. Lila guided them through the debris-strewn cabin to the exit. Steffi sent Aspen down first, watching as she safely landed on the tarmac below. She followed, gripping Hayes, whose breathing became shallower. Lila came last, falling as soon as she touched the ground. Emergency responders were already on the scene, their yells cutting through the haze. Paramedics rushed to approach Steffi and removed Hayes from her arms. "He's not breathing properly," she yelled, her voice breaking. They placed him on a stretcher and began CPR immediately. Aspen grabbed to Steffi's leg, weeping. Steffi's gaze shifted back to the blazing wreckage, where Clara's body lay. She wanted to go back and save her, but the flames were too hot, pushing everyone back. The paramedics worked frantically on Hayes, their expressions gloomy. Steffi stood paralyzed, her hand holding Aspen's, watching them fight to save her son. Minutes passed, each one lasting an eternity. Finally, one of the paramedics looked up, his face filled with defeat. "I'm sorry," he stated softly. "We did everything we could." Steffi's knees buckled. She let forth a deep and primal scream. Aspen cried beside her, knowing the loss but not completely comprehending it. Hayes, her lively and inquisitive 3-year-old, was gone. The world appeared to collapse in on itself, with the flames and sirens receding to a muffled roar. Steffi collapsed to the ground, hugging Aspen, her body heaving with sobbing. The aftermath was a haze. Steffi and Aspen were transported to a neighboring hospital, where Steffi received treatment for a concussion and mild burns. Fortunately, Aspen only suffered scrapes. The news of the crash circulated swiftly and dominated headlines. Forrester Creations released a statement expressing condolences and pledging assistance for the investigation. Steffi's family descended in San Francisco, Ridge, Taylor, Thomas, her grandparents Eric and Stephanie, all devastated by the loss of Hayes and Clara. The National Transportation Safety Board opened an inquiry, focused on the left engine, which showed indicators of catastrophic failure. Early findings indicated a manufacturing flaw in a turbine blade, albeit the precise cause would take months to determine. The fire quickly spread due to a burst gasoline line, overpowering the jet's safety systems. Captain Pierce and First Officer Chun had survived, but both were hospitalized with serious injuries. Lila too would recover, while carrying the agony of the day. Steffi stayed in the hospital for 2 days, and her body healed faster than her heart. She repeated the entire flight, the shaking, the smoke, the flames, the instant she realized Clara was gone, the second she knew Hayes would not make it. Guilt bit at her. Why did she bring them on this trip? Why didn't she insist on a commercial flight? The questions were never ending, with each one twisting the knife deeper. Aspen, who was too little to really grasp the loss, was continually asking about Hayes. "When is he coming back, Mommy?" she said, her eyes searching Steffi's for answers that did not exist. Steffi hugged her daughter tightly, trying to find words that wouldn't tear her further. Hayes and Clara's funeral was placed a week later in Los Angeles. The Forrester family, surrounded by friends, co-workers, and journalists, wept together. Steffi stood at the podium, her voice quivering as she described her son's contagious giggle, his love of dinosaurs, and how he'd curl up in her lap after a hard day. She described Clara's warmth, unwavering loyalty, and role as a second mother to the children. The atmosphere was weighted with grief from the loss of 2 lives too soon. Steffi went away from Forrester Creations in the weeks that followed, leaving Thomas in charge of the company. She concentrated on Aspen and enrolled her in therapy to help her deal with the trauma. She went to bereavement therapy, even though the pain felt like a permanent fixture, a shadow that trailed her everywhere. The media frenzy ultimately subsided, but the public's interest remained, spurred by Steffi's celebrity and the tragedy's dramatic nature. The investigation continued, with experts searching the wreckage for clues. Steffi obsessively watched the developments, desperate to figure out why her kid had disappeared. When the preliminary study verified the turbine blade issue, she turned her grief into action, meeting with aviation safety groups to demand stronger rules. She couldn't bring Hayes or Clara back, but she could try to keep another family from going through this grief. Months passed and Steffi started to rebuild. She returned to Forrester Creations, her love of design providing a small lifeline. Aspen resumed school, her humor gradually returning, but her eyes retained a calm sadness. Steffi found peace in little rituals like lighting a candle for Hayes every night and keeping Clara's favorite scarf on her dresser. The scars from that day would never go away, but Steffi learned to live with them, for the daughter she still had, and for the legacy she would leave in her son's memory. The Forrester jet disaster was a tragedy that impacted people's lives, serving as a sobering reminder of how rapidly things can change. Steffi saw it as a never-ending wound, as well as a call to resilience. intense love, and living in honor of the dead. The Forrester family jet swept through the pale morning sky, skimming along currents that appeared peaceful, even serene from the outside. Steffi Forrester sat near the window with her 2 children snuggling close, their heads swaying gently with the aircraft's gentle swing. She'd traveled innumerable flights before, for business, family vacations, and last-minute situations that required her presence, and flying had always been natural, almost second nature. This excursion, however, had a quiet intimacy to it. There was no entourage, no coworkers tapping away on laptops, and no whispered business discussions over champagne. It was just her and the kids, with the promise of returning home after a week away. She looked down at the smallest of the 2, who was sleeping soundly, tiny fingers curled against a blanket she'd brought from home. Her older child was watching something on a tablet, and the faint, tinny sound of a cartoon filled the cabin. Everything felt normal, safe, and even pleasant. The pilots in the cockpit talked casually, their voices low but steady over the buzz of the engines. The weather was clear, visibility was excellent, and they were on track. There was no warning, no hint of what was coming. At 35,000 feet, calamity rarely introduces itself pleasantly. It arrives like a predator, unexpected and merciless. The captain was the only one who detected the tiny tremble from the right engine, similar to a cough in the dark. He frowned as he checked the gauges. The numbers flashed erratically for half a second before stabilizing. He cast a quick glance at his co-pilot, who arched an eyebrow but said nothing. They focused their attention on the readouts. In the back, Steffi spotted nothing unusual. She was telling her kid about the first thing they would do when they arrived, perhaps go for ice cream before returning home. She didn't notice the captain's jaw tightening or his fingers hovering slightly too long over the controls. The tremor struck again, this time harsher and louder. The entire cabin appeared to vibrate for a moment before calming. This time Steffi felt it too. Her gaze lifted from her children, and her forehead wrinkled. It was subtle, yet enough to cause a slight discomfort. She convinced herself it was nothing. Turbulence is a common occurrence for airplanes. But her instincts, honed by years of unexpected turns in both professional and personal life, said otherwise. The co-pilot placed the first radio call, his voice calm yet clipped. "We're seeing a minor anomaly in the right engine. Requesting preliminary clearance to descend." The response crackled back. "Cleared for minor altitude adjustment. Advise on any changes." They changed their route, and for a few minutes the problem appeared to be resolved. Steffi felt the altitude change, a moderate decrease but nothing frightening. She stroked her daughter's hair and gazed out at the clouds drifting lazily by. Then, without warning, the right engine exploded. It wasn't a steady escalation. It was sudden and savage. A loud blast broke through the peaceful hum, and the cabin lights flickered. Steffi gasped and clutched her children reflexively. The impact was followed by a piercing metallic scream and a deep guttural growl as flames erupted from the wing outside her window. Orange and black billowed into the air, twisted by the slipstream. Alarms blared throughout the cockpit. The captain's voice was suddenly sharp and forceful. "Right engine failure, fire. Starting the emergency procedure." His hands rushed across the controls, cutting off fuel flow, activating extinguishers, and rerouting power to the left engine. The co-pilot made quick, urgent calls to air traffic control. His previously placid demeanor changed by sharp agitation. "We've lost an engine. We have a fire on the starboard side. Immediate emergency landing clearance required." Panic spread like electricity inside the cabin. The jet, which had previously been a smooth ride, suddenly trembled violently as the pilot struggled to maintain control. Steffi hugged both children closely, her voice low but forceful, telling them to stay close and everything will be fine. But her eyes had deceived her. She had encountered danger before. Emotional, professional, and sometimes physical, but this was different. This was the type of risk you couldn't outthink or negotiate. The pilots labored tirelessly, but the fire persisted. In reality, it was expanding, licking hungrily at the wing. Pieces of burnt and twisted metal began to break away, disappearing into the blue behind. The scent of burning fuel began to permeate the cabin. Steffi could hear a person in the back sobbing openly and another muttering prayers under their breath. The captain made an announcement over the intercom, his voice steady yet urgent. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a severe matter. We are preparing for an emergency landing. Please be calm, secure your seatbelts and follow all directions. His tone was measured, but every phrase bore the weight of someone who knew the odds were dwindling by the second. They were rapidly losing altitude, searching for any available length of land to bring the jet down. The nearest airport was still too far away, but an open field came into view, uneven and dangerous, but their best chance. The co-pilot began directing them towards it. The cabin rocked harder now, with each jolt eliciting a new wave of gasps and shouts. Steffi spoke to her children, repeatedly saying that she loved them, her voice nearly drowned out by the turmoil surrounding them. Then came the second explosion. It ripped through the already damaged engine, creating a shockwave that rocked the fuselage and flung blazing debris into the air. The flames spread higher, engulfing a portion of the wing. The plane jerked violently to one side, scattering loose debris in the aisle. Steffi shielded her children with her body when a suitcase fell from the overhead compartment, slamming into the seat next to her. The pilots tried valiantly to keep control, but the right side was failing totally. The jet was now leaning dangerously, and its descent was faster than expected. They were running out of altitude, time and choices. Impact was hardly the tidy cinematic moment you might expect. It was chaos compressed into seconds. The deafening scream of tearing metal, the shriek of shearing parts, and the horrible crunch as the fuselage impacted the ground. The cabin collapsed, the chairs lurched forward, and the world outside blurred into dirt, flames and shattered glass. Screams combined with the sound of destruction. Steffi's arms were clasped around her children, refusing to let go. When the plane finally came to rest, it was on its side, with smoke streaming from the wreckage. The area around them was charred in spots where burning debris had fallen. There was no silence, just a cacophony of cries, alarms, and the distant whoop of approaching sirens. Steffi was dizzy, her ears ringing, and her first thought was of the children. She frantically checked them. Both were conscious but shaken and weeping. A surge of relief swept over her, nearly taking her breath away. She unbuckled them and directed them to the nearest intact exit, where a flight attendant was waving survivors through. The air was thick with smoke burning her eyes and throat. As they stumbled out into the open, the extent of the devastation became apparent. The right side of the jet was nearly completely devoured by flames, with black smoke billowing into the sky. Pieces of wing and engine lay spread throughout the field, some of which were still blazing. The scent of jet fuel was strong, bitter, and harsh. Firefighters were already dousing the wreckage, calling to one another over the boom of the fire. Steffi kept her children close and shielded their faces from the sight. People emerged one by one, some walking, others being carried, and a few barely moving. Emergency responders responded quickly, treating to the injured and directing the dazed away from the wreckage. The understanding came slowly, like ice forming in her chest. Not everyone had made it out. It was confirmed within minutes. One victim did not survive. Steffi overheard it in an anxious, quiet tone from a paramedic speaking on a radio. She didn't know who it was, a fellow traveler or a crew member, but the weight of that loss pressed down hard. She drew her gaze away from the flaming wreckage of the plane and held her children closer. Reporters later described the event in stark, clinical terms: a private jet, engine failure, mid-air fire, emergency landing attempt, and one fatality. However, those words could never portray the human reality of it. The horror in those closing minutes, the way every second felt impossibly long, the desperate impulse to defend those you loved at whatever cost. Steffi's universe had shrunk in those moments to the small space between her arms, the frail, precious soul she was committed to protect. She knew she would remember the noises, images, and smell of burning fuel for years to come. Survival, she understood, was not a simple accomplishment. It was twisted with grief, shock, and the realization that another family's life had ended that day. Long after the flames were out, long after the wreckage had been cleared from that area, she would recall the calm before it all began, the way the clouds drifted by her window, the warmth of her daughter's head against her side, the harmless hum of a cartoon from the tablet. That recollection would become both comforting and unsettling, a reminder of how quickly everything can change and how fragile life can be. The investigation would last months, piecing together the series of mechanical breakdowns, the timetable of events, and the decisions made in the closing minutes. Experts would point to metal fatigue in the right engine, a fault so minuscule it had gone undetected during standard maintenance. There would be concerns regarding inspection protocols, and if the tragedy could have been avoided. Legal teams would become engaged. Statements would be released. Lives would be examined in news programs. However, none of this could alter the pictures that had been burnt into Steffi's head. She could still see the flames devouring the wing, the ground rushing at them, and her children's cries cutting through all other noise. She could still feel the force of the blow resonating through her bones. She could still hear the horrible stillness after realizing no one had made it out. In the days that followed, she went through the motions in a haze, speaking with investigators, answering calls from family and friends, and seeing her children sleep with a sense of desperate thanks. Strangers referred to her as a survivor, but she didn't feel like one. She felt like she had been grabbed in a current, dragged beneath, then spit back out, gasping. When the home was quiet at night, she would occasionally wake up unexpectedly, her heart beating, thinking she could smell smoke. She'd get up and check on the kids, needing to see them breathing and place her palm on their backs to feel the rise and fall. And always, behind the relief, there lurked the shadow of the person who had died. Life would continue, it always did, but it would never be the same. The plane, the flames, and the screaming would fade into the backdrop of daily life, but they would never completely disappear. They would linger on the outside of her memory, waiting to emerge in calm moments to remind her of the thin, fragile line between the usual and the inconceivable. And somewhere in that calm place inside her, she would carry the knowledge that the globe may catch fire in the span of a heartbeat, and you either make it out or you don't.